Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Passage Podcast. My name is John Sandy, and I'm today's host. This podcast aims to pursue the truth, an authentic Catholic life, a deep integration of faith and reason, and a joyful community of families, raising the next generation of the Catholic faithful. The guest for today's episode is Father John Nepil. I'm really excited to share our discussion where we discuss Father Nepil's background and insight into the Blessed Mother. We hope you enjoy our conversation and that it might bless you in some way. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today I have Father John Nepil. Father Nepil is a priest of the Archdiocese of Denver and a member of the Priestly Association of the Companions of Christ. He currently serves as vice-rector and professor of theology at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver. And as an aside, he is an avid hiker and mountaineer. I don't know what a mountaineer means. What does a mountaineer mean, Father Nepil?
It's just a fancy way of saying you hike technical mountains and sound cool by being a mountaineer.
And everybody that's listening probably can't see his face because this is just an audio recording, but I'm doing it by Zoom. But I can tell he's a little bit burnt or like sun-kissed in the face, which to me means he's been skiing. Have you
Oh
been skiing?
yeah, I was skiing. I was up in the mountains helping out. I love when they need help, and I'm like, hey, I'll come up because I'm not at a parish every weekend, so I can get up, and that means get some skiing in. So yeah, spring skiing right now. That's what we're doing.
So spring skiing means like it's slush at the bottom and good stuff at the top.
Yeah, it's warmer, but yeah, it gets kind of into this kind of freeze melt. But it's still just great and it's beautiful. And avalanche danger is less if you're in the backcountry doing stuff. So it's a great time of year. So, but this is a joy for me because John and I were in seminary together a long, long time ago, and have not seen you in forever. Now you're an esteemed judge and like a real adult. I'm pretty impressed. I don't know if I am, but you definitely are adulting
Oh,
well.
oh, don't hoodwink the audience. You got like your licentiate PhD twice over on like who, Lagrange? Who are you obsessed with out of Switzerland?
Balthazar.
Balthazar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and now like second in charge at a big seminary and teach doctorate. Well, do you teach doctorate level classes?
We don't have a doctoral program here, so I just teach the graduate level stuff. But yeah, I went to Rome. So John and I were in University of St. Thomas together. Gosh, Johnny, that was like over 20 years ago. I had great memories, great time together. I was studying for Denver, so I went back to Denver and did my studies there, and then was in the parish for a few years, and then went to Rome in 2015, did a doctorate, and then came back, and I've been at the seminary since 2019. So I'm trying to figure out, you finished your degree at St. Thomas and then law
Yeah,
school.
I was at SJV for 3 years. I stayed a year after you left because Denver kind of did a weird thing where they sent their guys to SJV at St. Thomas for 2 years and then yanked
Right.
them back to Denver for
Hmm.
the remaining education. And then I would have left after my third year to take a year off and then like married the first girl I dated, my wife Liz, and then went to law school right after St. Thomas. So I majored in philosophy and Catholic studies and then went to law school right after.
That's
So
a good way to do it. The two things I remember about Judge John Sandy from 20 years ago. Number one, this wrestling career that I don't know if he's ever talked about, and a lot of wrestling going on. Just guys like holes in the wall. My brother was in seminary with us. It was just a crazy group of young guys with a lot of energy. Father Bill Bear trying to kind of keep everything at bay. And then Shane Demon, Father Shane Demon, lighting you up about, he was trying to teach you to cantor. I think you were singing, but you were scooping all the time. And he kept yelling at you, Sandy, quit doing these dips or scoops. I don't even know what he was talking about, but those are my first memories as I was thinking about seeing you today. Those are great times.
yeah, we had a really really good crew, and I don't know how appropriate it is for the podcast. We can cut it out if it's not, but I do remember your nickname was Nepilepsy. Remember that?
Epilepsy. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So while we're on the topic though of seminary, before we move on, I think like talk a little bit about Father Bear, who he was to you, and like what impact he's had on your ministry.
So I think very similar to John and maybe other guys. A lot of us were raised Catholic, no sense of priesthood. I didn't even know any priests, and I really had no desire to practice my Catholic faith. And then right before my 18th birthday had a huge conversion back to the faith. And I think very similar kind of things. Steubenville the Rockies Conference, so great youth ministry, and then just an experience of found conversion in the sacraments, which very quickly led to going to seminary, and that was just like a lot of grace. And my brother also went, and it was there at St. Thomas that we met John. John came my brother's year, I think 2003. I was 2002. But we met this priest named Father Bill Bear, who passed away several years ago. And I'll never forget the first time I heard him preach because I had never heard anything like it. He was just absolutely dynamic and captivating and brilliant and funny and kind of scary at the same time. It's called the Bear Scare. But he was just a real man with a great mind and a capacity to fire up everybody who listened to him. He was absolutely magnificent as a leader of men, and he knew how to really inspire us deeply to give our lives to Christ. Just an amazing first experience of that.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I know he's still, looking down on us or whatever the cliche thing is, but I do have, kind of, it's probably a little bit ego, if I'm being honest, but I wish he was still here so I could like have a beer with him and just have him be like, you're on the Court of Appeals, like
Yeah,
attaboy. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
yeah.
that's what I was talking about, like young, I don't care if you're a priest or a dad or whatever, but do whatever you do with, great heroism. Do it. You don't do anything half throttle, and that's kind of what he stood for. And I think that that's a mark of somebody that's had his influence on their life. Certainly for me and
Uh,
like for you.
Absolutely. And he'd be so proud of you. And I think just any guys who he had a great sense also. He understood we're 18 years old. We're in a very initial phase of discernment. And the key thing that he wanted to impart upon us was not you all have to become priests like you and my brother discerned. It built you up. It laid a great foundation, but the call was to marriage and family. And then of course, this amazing career you've had in the judicial system. What he was inspiring in us was holiness of life. And you have to do that by greatness. And a lot of that means being real men. And he got that down. And sometimes we over spiritualize what holiness looks like. It's like doing everything right. And holiness is about really just going for it with a kind of open and heart that can be wounded, that can suffer, but also can receive deeply from the Lord. And he just had an amazing ability to communicate that to us and to inspire us.
And so, John, when were you ordained?
2011.
Okay. And what was your first parish assignment after that? Or what was your first assignment period?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder and was the chaplain there for my first 2 years. I was 27 when I got ordained. So they're looking at me like this guy's like 5 minutes older than us. And it was absolutely fantastic. I did a lot of climbing and skiing and backcountry trips with the students, and started to think about my own upbringing. How did I get this secular worldview? And then how do you dismantle that and start to build up a real Christian, a real Catholic worldview? That's what I became interested in that topic. I did that for 2 years, accompanied a lot of people through marriage prep and some conversions, and just like they became friends of a lifetime. I ended up going to Aurora, Colorado, which is east of Denver, to basically my worst nightmare, which is a huge Hispanic parish because my Spanish is so bad. And it ended up being amazing. The faith, what I discovered and learned there was I kind of went from Boulder's kind of the intellectual elite, and that was incredible. So those are my two parish assignments.
Got it. And what school did you go to obtain your doctorate from? Was it Santa Croce?
Santa Croce, yeah, which is the Opus Dei school in Rome. So I was there for 4 years.
Got it. And how was that experience? Because you had never gone to Rome or studied in Rome, I should say, other than maybe the study abroad program or something, but you had never like lived in Rome prior to that, correct?
No, I had visited Rome years before, and but had not. No, I had no idea it was coming. I had told the Archbishop in conversation, I was like, I come from a family of teachers. I love teaching. It's kind of a passion of mine. If this could be of service, and as bishops do, they don't say anything. He didn't say anything for a year, and then boom, got the call. Went over there. It was an incredible experience. I think people thought that I was kind of just like drinking spritzes in piazzas all day, kind of just hanging out, walking and praying in churches, which we definitely did a lot of that. It was amazing, but it was a grind. I mean, it was like writing. You do 2 years of coursework in Italian, and then you start doctoral research. And I'm on a time frame. I got to kind of crank on this thing, and you have to write a book, basically that no one's ever written. So you got to figure out a project, and then be like, write a book that no one's ever written. Huge pressure. but I had a great support system, some companions of Christ, some friends in my association were over there, some guys from Minnesota that I knew, and then I had a really amazing thesis director who really helped me through it. So it was a truly incredible experience.
And what was your focus on? Like, did you like select a topic, or like was it a certain subset that you received a doctorate in?
Yeah, so basically theology, there's two kinds of theology. There's dogmatic theology and moral theology. Dogma just means teaching in Greek, so it's thinking about things in terms of ideas, formulating them as concepts. So like the Trinity example would be an example of a conceptual formulation. That's a class. Moral theology is about informing action. That's much more about kind of your field than mine. So I studied dogmatic theology, and the bishop said focus on the church. When I got to Rome, I met this great Portuguese ecclesiologist, and I really liked his style. And in our conversations right away, because I started kind of doing the coursework with the aim of the doctorate and started researching, he said, really, the conversation is around Mary and the church, getting the understanding of the church as feminine and maternal, and seeing that intrinsic relationship, so much so that you can't understand them apart from each other. And that became my project, and that's what I teach a number of courses, but my favorites are Mariology, the study of Mary, and ecclesiology, the study of the church.
And so, Catholic Passage at its core is built and designed in a way to try to help folks who have the obligation to pass on the faith to others, specifically their kids, right? In the midst of their busy careers and whatever they got going on in their life, how do you pass on the faith to someone else? I mean, I think my goal isn't just to go to heaven, it's to bring my kids with me. And if I can't bring my kids with me, that's not like I failed, right?
Yeah.
And I know that there's some free will there. Like at some point dad can't force it. I get it. But that's sort of like the ultimate weight on my shoulders as a dad is I hate to be blunt about it, but I don't want my kids to suffer eternal damnation. That scares me. And so what role do you see in your field of study with the family unit and that kind of passing on of the faith?
Yeah, that's a great question, a huge question. Maybe we'll just kind of start into it, and I'd like to tie Mary into it as well. I reflect on my own upbringing. Parents from the Midwest, a military family, bounced around, ended up in Colorado in 1991. A good moral foundation, but no sense of the why behind the faith. And my parents, now older, and my dad's a deacon, and everybody's really faithful, and it all worked out. But I was really kind of going off the rails, and I think that at a certain point, it just looked like moralism. It just looked like rules and ideas, none of which had any bearing on my life. And then this brings to the next point. They were inconsistent with my understanding of freedom, which was not rooted in the gospel. It was not rooted in a Christian way of thinking about things. It was a very secular mentality, very modern secular mentality. So there was a confrontation in my early teenage years between the faith of my upbringing, which my parents kind of held to, with this kind of emerging adolescent freedom, which in one sense is a natural part of life. Like Romano Guardini has a very interesting book where he talks about the kind of stages of life. And he's like, adolescence is actually, we shouldn't freak out when there's pushback and resistance. And I think that we do. I think because of that fear of like, we're losing the kids. But the child is emerging, and self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-expression are emerging. The person is emerging. And with that comes this sense of I'm struggling with my childhood identity, which is intimately connected to this faith. And so every kid's going to do this differently, but there's going to be this kind of innate struggle. Now, what I'm not saying is you just kind of let it go. Like all of my friends in high school, they got confirmed in eighth grade, and then the parents are like, now you get to decide, do you want to be Catholic? Guess what they all chose? They don't want to be Catholic because they all have a secular pagan mentality. So that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying kind of don't freak out when there is disruption and resistance to the faith, because I actually think it's part of moving into a mature adult faith, which requires kind of a death and transformation of the child, or I should say the expression of the child. as it's lived out within the family. That's the first thing. And I don't want to keep talking, so I'll volley to you here if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think that that's really good because I think that as parents, we think that the sky is falling, right?
Yeah,
Whenever anything, I mean, as a priest or just somebody outside that dynamic, you have the ability to kind of see it for what it is in a better way than a parent who's in it, where they think, little Johnny doesn't like going to church or doing this. It's hard though, because what is the why? To a 10-year-old, what do I tell the child is the why? Because
yeah,
Jesus loves. I mean, but they're not at the age where they're starting to have more of the philosophical, but then what? But then what? But then what? I mean, I do see that much more in high school. I teach confirmation students, and you can tell as I'm giving them Aquinas's five ways and I'm talking about the infinite regress. You can
hmm,
almost see like they're like, okay, now we're getting somewhere,
right,
right? Like it's starting to click for them for the first time. But for a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, Aquinas' infinite regress, like what? I want chicken
yeah,
nuggets. Like,
yeah.
like if it doesn't have anything to do with chicken nuggets and Bluey, I'm not really interested, Dad.
I know,
Uh,
I know.
it's tough to kind of think of that way, and to bring them into the why. And I say this, for me, I had a similar experience you did. Grew up in the faith too, but rejected it or whatever. Wanted my own. I was more concerned about being cool at school than I was
Yeah,
about, anything else. And that changed for me at Steubenville. For me, it really did too. Where for the first time, I kind of understood the why. For the first time
mhm,
ever, like really understood the why. And it was both wonderful, but also shameful, right? Because there was deep regret and remorse about, what occurred up to that point. But that wasn't like as much intellectual, although some parts of it was, but it was also quite emotional, a connection with God in an emotional way. But that's not for everybody, right? And one of my fears is, well, my child will my kids as they get older ever have that connection where it's kind of, off the horse type experience, so to speak? Or is that just gonna, is it gonna be nothing to where they get the why somewhere else that I don't want them to, the University of Iowa and I don't know. I won't say too much, but whatever, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, great questions. And, I just want to reiterate, like, not having children, I can't imagine what it would be like to raise children with this deep faith that I want to be in heaven for all eternity with my children. There's nothing more important in my life. And to spend your whole life for the spiritual foundations to be laid, I understand why this is a huge preoccupation. So I think it's really beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge the kind of the sense I talk to people a lot about that, about kind of how do we lay the foundations right. So let's talk about Bluey for a second, though. I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews who love Bluey. And what I like
Do do
about Bluey,
do
yeah,
do 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 do.
oh yeah, what I like about it is there's a lot communicated in that show, and it's a way of doing it that kids love. And there's also a lot of good humor in there. My brother loves he's like, there's some really funny stuff in it. But the key point is for children, not the high school kids in confirmation, but for children who are not asking the why question, who are just kind of emerging to their own rationality, immersing truth as much as possible in narrative. That's the power. The story is what communicates it. And so it's not just clean the bathroom. Why? Because I told you to do it. I mean, sometimes you got to just lay down the law. Like dad's got to just, you got to, make it happen, or mom. But in terms of the faith, like just kids have such an incredible imagination. And I think that like little things like taking time to pray with scripture. I love when I would teach Totus Tuus in the summers as a seminarian. I loved doing Lectio Divina with kids because their imaginations are just so wild, right? I remember one time we were doing this Lectio on the Last Supper, and I just was kind of, they're all sitting there and it's quiet and they're just kind of praying with it, and I'm teaching them how to pray, and then I'm like, all right, let's just open it up. Like, what are you guys seeing? And this one kid raises his hand. He goes, the room is full of breakable things. I was like, only a kid would view the universe in terms of breakable and non-breakable objects. I was like, that is so funny. So things like that, just immersing, engaging their imagination, keeping them in stories, filling their life with story, and just remembering that that's how truth is really communicated. And then as they get older, really to then begin engaging the questions more deeply and letting the questions emerge, but in such a way as to kind of navigate or direct them. And a lot of that then falls down to it in the adolescent phase. I think that it can't fall to mom and dad because they are de facto rejecting you because they're rejecting the faith. But they're not actually rejecting the faith. They're rejecting the form of the faith, which feels to them like childhood. And they're trying to break out of that. And so parents have to kind of, you got to figure that out. Like, who are the people in the life? Who is the community that we surround ourselves in? Are there schools we can avail ourselves to? That's where we have to really be creative and pray deeply about how does this actually come to be.
Yeah. Do you think Mary and the Holy Family have any lessons to be learned in that regard specifically?
100%. 100%. Yeah. And I think that's where we can kind of do the deep dive here. One of the things that's, I think, really important about Mary is to understand Marian devotion, but it has to be grounded in spirituality. So what I mean by that is we don't just do things, but like why are we praying the rosary? We're praying the rosary because we want to meditate on the life of Jesus with Mary's eyes. What does that mean? We want to see things differently. We don't see things as they actually are. But Mary had this beautiful grace called the Immaculate Conception that allowed her to see things as they were. And that means the good and the evil. And a lot of living a happy life is about seeing things rightly. Have we ever had an experience where we made a judgment because we were looking at things and we saw it wrong? I did that like 45 minutes ago in class with a bunch of seminarians. I was like, misread that situation. Got too emotional, got whatever. She sees things clearly. And so the rosary is not just pounding through the beads, but it's actually about learning how to see again. That's an example of spirituality informing devotion. So that's the first thought. But again, I'm going to keep volleying it back to you because I can keep talking and talking.
Now, is part of that also seeing the suffering through Mary's eyes?
Absolutely. I think Mary's life needs to be understood as a long pilgrimage of faith from the Annunciation to the cross. So Mary's life is the same as Christ. It's coextensive with it. It's identical in terms of time. Mary is the only one there at the moment of his conception. She's the church in that embryonic form. And Mary walks through her life. And one of the things that gets kind of confusing and mysterious is the way Christ treats her when he leaves the house at 30. So he enters into his public ministry. It looks like he's done with her.
Right.
So what we have is we have this pilgrimage of faith. Mary is a woman of faith. That's really important to remember. She has faith. Christ does not have faith like we do because he has the beatific vision, meaning that he sees God immediately as God. He's a divine nature. But in his humanity, he's experiencing things. Mary is completely created human. And what does that mean? Well, it means that Jesus is moving her through places of unknowing and preparing her heart to stand at the foot of the cross as the new Eve, as we would say, and to make a yes on behalf of all creation. So Mary's going to do at the cross what she did at the beginning of Christ's life, which is say yes, or fiat, be it done. But she's going to do it in silence, and she's going to do it as the church. So the point of that is to say the depths of Marian spirituality is really about embracing the non-comprehension and the powerlessness that comes in human life. The absolutely unexpected, sometimes terrible feeling, almost sense of tragedy that happens in human life. It's part of living in a fallen world. Mary's the key to navigating that. And I think that what we have to witness to our children is a deeper kind of spiritual embrace that's not just suck it up and do it. And it's also not take control and do whatever, because we have so much technological and scientific prowess now we can control anything. We think we can eradicate suffering. You can't. Can't from your life, can't from your kid's life. And this Marian disposition of receptivity is going to be the key to understanding how God works in conjunction with Mary, how Christ works with Mary in order to sanctify the world.
Now, your book was it Mariology, John?
Yeah. It's a pretty boring book. I'm not gonna lie. You should buy the second one. I told John, if you want to buy a book of mine, don't buy the first one. But it's great if you want to. It's called A Bride Adorned, and it's focused on a topic called Mary Church perichoresis. This is usually where people fall asleep. Perichoresis is a very technical term that comes out of the ancient church, and it was used to describe how the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are distinct persons, but one essence. They interpenetrate each other. They mutually abide in each other. Perichoresis literally means to dance around, but it's this kind of dynamic unity. the best way we see this expressed in creation is marriage. You and Liz enter into the one flesh union of marriage. It's no longer John Sandy and Liz. It's one reality, which means that there's complete togetherness and there has to be complete unity, all the while being distinct persons. And that being said, you can't understand John now apart from his relationship to Liz, and Liz apart from the relationship to John. So the relationship is so intrinsic and essential to the person that you can't understand one apart from the other. There was a 19th century theologian named Matthias Shaben, you might have heard of, and he pulled this from the Trinitarian theology of the fathers and said, Mary and the church are a perichoresis. They are so intimately in relationship to one another that you can't understand one apart from the other. So basically what I do in the work is I trace historically, how did they get separated? How did we get to a point where, like, you talk to non-Catholic Christian friends and they think Mary's like this fourth person in the Trinity as Catholics, and the church is just a cold hierarchy run exclusively by men. How do we get to this place? And then how does this vision of a Marian church, this perichoresis, this relationship, actually help us understand Mary, understand the church? The reason is they were never supposed to be separated. We got to think about them in relationship.
And where do you think that fissure occurred? Like, if you had to point to a time or an event that, like, maybe was the catalyst for the start of that, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so in the medieval time, there was the emergence of science. So theology as a science is something we started doing in the 12th century. Aristotle kind of makes his way through the Muslim world and comes back in. And so all of a sudden we shift our perspective when we start doing science as a scientific way. It's a systemization of things. It allows us and gives us great precision and clarity. And we go into all these kind of things. But the birth of ecclesiology, the modern science of the church, and the birth of Mariology happen independently from each other. And they're just missing a bit of this vision that the fathers had, as that they were intrinsically connected together. They kind of arose for different reasons at different times. It's kind of a longer story. But basically, with the way that you're doing theology now affects the way that you're thinking about things. And you're not focusing as much on relationship, a la how are things connected to each other, as you are independently breaking them down, systematizing them, and trying to unpack them as much as possible. So it wasn't until the 19th century when you had a renewal of patristic theology, the guys from the first millennium, how they were doing theology, where you start to take all this great kind of scientific development understanding of revelation, but then immerse it back in the contemplative and kind of relational style of theology that the fathers had. And that gave way to the 20th century and to the renewal of the time we're living in with the Second Vatican Council.
Got it. Now, what's your second book?
Second book's called To Heights and Unto Depths, Letters from the Colorado Trail. It is a popular read. It's not an academic one like the first one, but it's a story, tells, and it's a narrative that communicates a theology of creation and humanity. Basically, what I was asking was the question of, why was it when I was in the mountains, and again, you can apply this to the lakes, to the woods, to the ocean, to anywhere in creation. It doesn't just have to be Colorado. Why was it I was seeking to be immersed in nature, but I wasn't finding God? What happened there? And what happened was I didn't have a worldview that was Catholic, that was centered on the incarnation. So I started to explore this in my 20s. And then as a chaplain, I really got interested in this topic because I was in Boulder, where there's a pagan culture, but they loved the outdoors. So I'd take them to the backcountry, and all of a sudden we started having these conversations. So I started to kind of track this. In the summer of 2022, I had an opportunity with three guys to hike the Colorado Trail, which is a 30-day through hike. So all in one go, 486 miles right through the Rockies, 90,000 feet up, 90,000 down. And it also, I was like, this is the opportunity to write this. 100 years prior, Romano Guardini, one of my favorite theologians, wrote a book called Letters from Lake Como, which takes place in the north of Italy. It's reflecting on technology and modernity, but also on the Catholic faith in our time. And he really inspired this book, Letters from the Colorado Trail, which is the subtitle, To Heights and Unto Depths, which is taken from Ephesians chapter 3. And so the book tells the story of the narrative. It also ties in some ridiculous and fun experiences I've had climbing 14ers. I was saying mass on all the high peaks of Colorado, which are called 14ers, and finished that at the same time. But each letter unpacks a different aspect of our Catholic worldview. And it might be interesting, going back to this family conversation, to take a look at it, because It's about a 5-page chapter. I wrote it. It takes about 10 minutes to read a chapter. There's 32 chapters. So it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night. You're exhausted from the day. It's hard to pick up a book and be like, we're reading it. And I wanted to write something where it's like, you feel like literally just as I was writing a letter from the trail, I'm exhausted. So too, you're getting through the day, pick this up, pull something from it. You hear some funny stories along the way, and you follow with us. You trace with us through the Rocky Mountains.
And so, got it. But what specifically is it about? Meaning, like, if there's a thread going through it, would you say, like, it's, you talked about how is it that you could experience this but not come to the creator? And is it kind of your reflection on why that is?
Yeah, I'm carrying the question into the trail. The real heart of it all, though, is that the Catholic worldview is centered on the incarnation. So the fact that God became man, that is the key to everything. That's not just one aspect of the faith. That's the key and the heart of it all, is God becomes man. Now, what's interesting about that is I say there's three parts, so to speak, to the incarnation. There's God, there's humanity, and there's creation. So God assumes humanity and enters into creation, and the story unfolds from there of God's revelation. This is the method by which God communicates himself. What I found from reflecting back on my experience is that if you don't have the key to the incarnation, the incarnational worldview, then all three of those things fall apart if they're not in relationship to each other.
And what
So
is
one
the
of
incarnational
yeah,
worldview?
so a worldview is a system of ideas and values that kind of cohere to help us understand the totality of the real. That's how Ratzinger describes it. So it's the most basic thing in me. It's my vision of reality. The Greeks used to call it an ethos. It's the permeating vision. It's the most basic thing from everything I had for breakfast this morning to why I'm not eating meat on this Friday on Lent, even though I'm starving right now because I've been fasting, to the person that I marry, to the career that I pursue, to the hobbies I'm interested in. Everything is influenced by the value set and base of the worldview. The problem with this kind of gigantic epochal shift we're in, moving out of Christendom into into an apostolic age, which is just unthinkable in a way. We don't even realize the moment we're living in. It's so unique. What has been presupposed is that you go do Catholic things and you're going to have a Catholic worldview. That doesn't happen anymore. We have to get really creative and really kind of double down on the formation of the mind, and the transformation of the mind is essential if we're going to live out and open ourselves, avail ourselves to the life of faith.
So would incarnational worldview be synonymous or not synonymous, and if not, why, with just forming your conscience with that of the church?
Yes, the conscience is an aspect of it, but I think that it's a broader way. So, for example, you are, and maybe it's a different way of thinking of it. Maybe you could say from conscience. I'd have to think about that. But let's say, for example, like the way we talk, one of the things I noticed with college kids was they would talk about nature and not creation. So nature, and then I started to realize, I was like, oh, they mean something very different. Nature is this kind of autonomous, self-subsisting reality that I go into. Creation is what I am and what everything is, and creation implies a creator, and so it's intrinsically relational. So nature can just be the sweet, awesome backdrop for my Instagram post on top of a mountain. Creation actually demands a response and an engagement with the reality of the other, and it beckons to me. And that's an example of like what we would call metaphysics of creation. So there's a deeper understanding of the being of things. They speak, they manifest, they're expressive. And that only plays in when you have an understanding of how God reveals himself, because we don't really know and understand what creation is apart from God coming into creation as creation in Christ in his humanity.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's really good. And do you think there's any lessons to be learned from the book in terms of this worldview relative to the family unit?
Well, I think first off, I think that immersion in creation, being immersed in it, is essential for recovering our humanity. So I start with the story in the book about my first time I went to climb one of these 14ers. I was 12 years old. And my dad's a career military guy. He's a great guy. He's actually a very kind-hearted man, but this makes him sound kind of rough. We get to the base of the mountain and I'm unpacking my sleep, all my stuff, and I realize no sleeping bag. And it's like September, freezing. We're at 10,000 feet. And I look at my dad as pathetically as possible and say, Dad, forgot my sleeping bag. And he looks at me and he goes, Son, tonight you're going to learn a life lesson. And that was the end of the conversation. I just laid there and had a miserable night. And so I think that what happens when you take kids into the backcountry, and again, this can be camping, this can be fishing, just getting on the lake, getting out the water. We got to turn the phones off. We got to check out of the technology, and we need to literally retreat into creation together as families. I think it's indispensable. And the phones have radically changed the human experience. So that's a huge another conversation about how do you manage that, the technological paradigm as it kind of infiltrates family life. But I really think that just the human experience of A, squandering time with dad or mom, B, being uncomfortable and awkward in silence, maybe even bored, God forbid, but the good things that happen with that, C, hardship, doing difficult things, all of these things just happen when you're out of the comfort zone of our urbanized life. And I think that living in a rural part of the country, such as Northwest Iowa, and a great university at Okoboji, for the right? Okay, yeah. You guys, you think
A
you're
fake
tricky.
Okoboji.
I know,
Fake.
yeah, fake one, yeah. Just wanted to see if you'd show your cards. But living in a rural atmosphere, I think presents there's a more of a natural native stability. It's just being eclipsed by the technological and the digitalization of things. So you can be in a small town and feel like you're in a city because all of a sudden you're surrounded by Netflix and everything like that. And so I think the challenge is still there, but I think that you are actually more predisposed living in a rural environment to cultivate that kind of simplicity, stillness, silence in the hearts of your children, which really create the kind of reflective and contemplative souls that will open themselves to reality and ultimately to God.
Now, have you seen a difference do you teach first years?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
But
like 1 year where the guys enter, which is like I kind of call it almost like a pre-philosophy year I don't think you and I ever did, but that kind of
right.
changed. But I mean, do you see a different type of seminarian that's coming in because of that effect of the inability to go out to creation and escape than maybe that which existed 30, 40 years ago?
I think so. I think that there's in general there is a movement towards equating happiness with comfort. And there's a kind of softness that we're seeing in the younger generation of men. I'm not talking about effeminacy, but just I've never had to do hard things before. And I can't do hard things. And what we want is not just like the David Goggins types. Like what I want is a man of masculine sacrifice. I tell guys like sometimes I have to have some very hard conversations, and I say to them, "No married man with small children would ever do this. He wouldn't even think to do it because he's constantly giving of himself and he's exhausted." So there's a whole kind of bourgeois movement that just gets totally annihilated by a guy when he has his first child, and all of a sudden it's like my whole life has been flipped upside down. And I really am worried about priests if we don't build that in right away. There's no Liz at home in the rectory saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Leaving dishes in the sink," right? Which I tell the priests I live with, "What are we doing here? Like, no dishes in the sink." But if you don't have that, there's no one calling you onto a deeper self gift, and then you can get into the dangerous realm where you're calculating your self gift and kind of father does this and then he's gone, and I'm going to take this vacation, and so that's a very long answer to a simple
Well,
question.
no, but I remember, maybe you'll remember this bear scare story, but like he'd always talk about when Archbishop Flynn was, I think, rector of the Mount at Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg. He'd always call a guy in who was sleeping in, right? And not going to mass, not doing what he was supposed to be doing, holy hour or whatever. And his window like overlooked the interstate as outside the Mount. And he'd say, "You see those cars on the highway?" And he'd go, "Yes, Archbishop." He goes, "You know what they're doing?" And the seminarian would go, "I have no clue, Archbishop." Well, at that time, it would have been just the rector, Father Flynn. He'd say, "They're going to work." They just got done waking up their kids, bathing them, brushing their teeth, getting them breakfast, and getting them off to school. And now they're going to go to work. And guess what they're going to do when they get home? They're going to tend to the kids, get dinner done, do baths, get PJs, schoolwork. And they're going to do all that. They're going to go to extracurricular activities, and that's all before 9 o'clock. And his point there was, you're not doing that because you don't have a family,
Right.
but you have other obligations. And if you're not even attending to those, basically this is glorified bachelorhood.
Yeah.
He made him the riot act on that. And I think his point was well taken, where he's saying, you know, you're escaping the realities that so many people have to do right now for a purpose. It's time you step up to the plate and realize that. I think that that's apt, that as you said, would you ever expect somebody that just had a kid do this?
Yeah. And I think that it's not like some people will then take that, and you're not saying this, but they'll take it and be like, well, the problem is priests are celibate and blah, 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 that kind of thing.
Oh
And I
no,
think,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The challenge is the isolation that priests face, but also the guys that I'm receiving in seminary have been coddled by their parents. I just have to say, like, I was raised by like no BS Minnesota, military. Like, you do what's right is right. That was the law. And why are we doing this? Because this is what you're doing. Okay, like I had a dad who my dad actually grew up in Montana. He was a farmer. He used to make us mow this thing called the South 40. The South 40 was the green belt behind our house. We didn't even own it, and we were like hated mowing the South 40, and it was like he just was like, yeah, I like the way it looks and it builds character. So we're out there with this old lawnmower mowing this like 4 acres, just dying in the summers. And now we look back at it and we laugh and we're like, he just had a sense that like, I don't need to be their best friend. And I don't need to always make them just feel super loved. And I think what happened is that was the boomer era. The Gen Zers or the Gen Xers, man, they are soft on their parenting. I mean, I've talked to my friends who are in their 50s and they're like, oh, I would never not give the sleeping bag to my 12-year-old son. I mean, that's basically unthinkable. And they're coddling and they're creating soft men, and we're trying to build them up into men of sacrifice. But the same crisis is hitting in married life. It's just you just don't have an option when you have a child. You really can't. It's a lot harder to live a bachelor life. But in general, the cultural crisis is there. We've been
Well,
coddling the last
I,
generation.
I think this would be a good plug too for Companions of Christ, because like we don't have that in Northwest Iowa. I know it was up in the Twin Cities. There's one in the Twin Cities. You've started, I think you were one of the founders of the one in the
Yeah.
Denver area. Describe that, because when we're talking about priests in isolation, I think the Companions is a beautiful, good thing for that very reason.
Yeah, so when John and I went to St. John Vianney, this priest, Father Bill Bear, was a part of this association. We met these guys. Basically, it's a way of living diocesan priesthood that is living a common life. So priests, you think of them, diocesan priests, as kind of lone rangers. If you want to live in community, go be a religious. But when you study the history and the theology of the church, you realize that for the large portion of history, priests lived in community. And they didn't just live in the same building, they shared four things: prayer, study, meals, and recreation. And that, even as a family, that might be something to think about. Like, how do we structure? This is the four basic principles of the common life: prayer, meals, study, and recreation. How do we build that in as a family? Well, as priests, we try and do that. So the guy, Father Brian, just dropped off some Wahoo's fish tacos because I usually have lunch with the guys, but scheduled this. And, we're going to be together tomorrow night for Lord's Day dinner. We prayed a holy hour at 6:30 in the morning. I was up late drinking wine with a friend last night. I'm sorry, it's Lent, but it was somebody's birthday. And I was like, man, I don't want to get up. 6 a.m. Don't want to get up for holy hour at 6. But I know he's there and he's going to be like, what are you doing, man? So I'm like, I'm up. And so those little things help to build up. And not to mention the baseline need for human beings to have vulnerability and accountability. We just have to have intimate relationships, and priests don't exclusively need that with priests. There's priests are made for friendship with laity, but also there's something about it that we have to cultivate. We're just bonded together by the nature of our sacrament.
Well, that's awesome though. And I also think it might be, the church isn't what it was in the sense of the priest populace in the 50s, 40s. in that, at least in Northwest Iowa, first off, we're rural to begin with, where we're not, you might drive 40 miles before you hit the next town sometimes. And that type of disbursement all the more makes it more difficult, I think, for the presbyterate to feel like there's kind of a unifying a force there. And so thinking big picture about how do we get back to having these bigger rectories with four priests in them, even
Yeah.
if there's not a need in that parish for four priests where they have to go out from. I think, and I've talked to Bishop Nicholas about this before, but I really think that at least in the Diocese of Sioux City, that's the future of the church. Because if you put a set of, I don't know how many priests we're going to have ordained in the next 30 years, but if you put 30 priests and spread them out over the entire chunk of Northwest Iowa, that's a dangerous thing. You're going to need to have these guys, I think, at some level, feel like there's a fraternity there beyond just getting together once every month for, whatever community building event they may have. I mean, there's something about living a communal life that I think is important given the way the structure of the church, at least in Northwest Iowa, is heading.
I think that that's right on. And I think that that is the future. And I think that there's almost like a Copernican revolution that needs to happen in the way we think about priests and specifically about assignments. Now, this involves everybody. So first and foremost, bishops have got to stop plugging holes. But this is just, if I was in these shoes, I'd be doing the same thing. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'm filling these holes. So we just plug guys here, plug guys there. There's no accounting for like human need, like just the need for relationship stability. Good bishops like Nicholas will be attentive to the men and also be thinking about these things. But ultimately, this kind of servile obedience of just like you're basically a stormtrooper, go fill this hole. We got to stop thinking like that. Number two, priests need to transform their own vision and be like, I have needs. I have needs. I'm a limited thing. Like, but not fall into the kind of victim mentality of like it's all about self-care, which is part of the problem. So we got to figure that out. And then lastly, the laity need to really help us by saying, we're going to make the sacrifice of not having daily mass on this day or in this parish in order for priests to live together and to really live a holy life. So if everybody dials in on this, but a lot of times the laity would be like, oh, I'll be damned if we don't have a priest right there. And he does everything that he's done for the last 50 years. It's like, we can't do that in every place, in every time anymore if you want priests to be healthy.
Yeah,
So,
and that's the reality, especially in the Diocese of Sioux City, because you can't use the priest, Father Feller, for example, to devote his entire morning to a mass at 7:30 for 20 people. That doesn't the return on investment. I hate to view the sacramental
yeah,
life like that, but that's not a good use of his limited spiritual bandwidth. How
yeah,
about that? You know,
absolutely.
and so you got to think about that when you're thinking about what does the church look like in, these small, really small Iowa towns that were used to having their own priest back in the 40s and 50s. And yeah, so
Yeah, it's only going to get more desperate. So we have to change the whole model because what you're going to do is you're going to go from 50 to 30 to 20 priests, but you're still going to have 50 parishes. And then you're going to have guys doing way too much. And so, anyways, exciting stuff we could talk about all day long.
now before I get off, how many 14ers have you done in
All of them.
Colorado? That's
All
what
of
I
them.
thought. So how many
Yeah.
14ers are there in Colorado?
There's 54 14ers in
So
Colorado.
you've done 54, and not only have you done it once, haven't you done it twice?
Yeah, went back and said mass on them all because, yeah, you got to have some screws loose, I think, to go back for them again. But I just love it. Just love it.
So which one was the most difficult, challenging, did you think? Like, is there like one or two that stand out where you're
Yeah.
like,
There's a peak called Capitol near Aspen, and Capitol has something called the knife's edge you have to cross. So it's between this ridge line to get to the peak, and it's truly a knife's edge. I have a chapter in the book where I talk about it. Imagine maybe a 6-inch kind of ledge that's perfectly cut across, and you have to kind of walk. You either have to kind of straddle it or kind of hold the side of it as you move across, and then it just drops straight 2,000 feet on both sides, and that's pretty gnarly to cross. And then there's a peak
because
called
it's not like you have a
Little Bear.
safety rope, right? When you're doing
No,
that.
well, yeah, sometimes we use ropes, but that's actually more dangerous to use a rope because it's the way that there's no way that you could actually. rope up and make that maneuver. So yeah, so you just got to go for it.
And it's literally 6 inches. That's how much you get for your foot.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
imagine it's windy.
yeah.
Is
It's wild. Yeah.
is there like a good versus bad time to cross that? Like, I mean, do you know, like, okay, midsummer is the best time if you're going to do that one?
Yeah. You know what's interesting actually is that people die every year on Capitol, but oftentimes not on the knife's edge. It's kind of a curious thing, just thinking about the psychology of how people are. They die because they cross the knife's edge to come back, and then they try and cut down this ridge. It looks like you can kind of go down, but it cliffs out. So people start working instead of following the path, the track, which goes further out, they fall off the cliffs around the knife's edge. So it's like, this sounds like a homily, but it's almost like the danger that you see, you're actually going to be safer on. It's the one that you don't, when you're a little self-reliant or trying to cut corners. That's when we get in trouble.
And I mean, you talk about it as if you actually need to, do you study these before you go? Like, you can't just wing it based on what you see. I'm
Yeah,
assuming
yeah,
that, like, you got to know, like, when you get to this part, stay right because of
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah. The navigation piece is really essential for safety. And there's a lot of good resources out there. And even as you climb them, and if people from Iowa are ever out in Colorado, I mean, it really encourages a lot of 14ers that are their hikes. They're easier hikes. It's hard to be at that elevation. You want to acclimate a little bit, but yeah, it's they're incredible.
What's your favorite mountain to ski? Like, if you're actually going to ski groom stuff. I mean, I know you like the backwoods stuff, but
Yeah,
um, but
I think
didn't your buddy like draw like some sort of really rare Aspen to Breckenridge pass that you were able to do?
yeah, just a couple weeks ago, a team of 11 of us skied from Aspen to Vail. It was 85 miles. It took us 6 days, and that was in mid-February. We did that. That was a pretty wild experience.
Was that, and you like stay at these huts that like just
Hmm.
exist from, I don't know, talk about creation, but like
Yeah,
I'm thinking like a Hobbit hut
yeah,
up
they're
on.
they're a little nicer than that. There's a nonprofit that keeps them up, and they have a fireplace, and you don't have running water or anything like that, but you have the essentials, and you're just happy to be warm each night. But the weather was good, the traverse was good. Norovirus hit on day 5, so guys were laid out, but we finished it, so it was pretty gnarly.
And is that type of skiing harder than any type of like because I mean, are you actually skiing down stuff or is it more like traversing? Does that make sense?
A lot of traversing and then some descending as well. And we play it very, very careful because avalanches happen just above like 27, 28 degrees in terms of the grade. And so you really want to be careful about what you're doing. So you're not skiing like crazy turns, and you're descending. It's really fun, but you got to be really careful about what that kind of terrain that you're on. So there's a lot of touring.
I cut
So
you off. What's your favorite place to ski though? In Colorado.
Crested Butte for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you
So
skied
my
snowmans?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, Snowmass is great. You've been there?
Oh, that's where we ski. We
Oh
ski
yeah.
snowmans either every year or every other year. Yeah.
Okay, well you let me know next time you're out in Snowmass. I'll come join you. Same as for
Okay.
you. It's a great mountain. Amazing mountain. Yeah.
Crested Butte though is your favorite.
Yeah. That's kind of my home mountain. It's 4 hours from Denver, but my aunt and uncle retired there. And so I spent a lot of time up there, and it's just a really magical place. So, but Snowmass is amazing. They're all incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, I have dreams of like sometime like retiring and just going out to like the backwoods country and being like a country lawyer up in the mountains, a range lawyer. So,
Yeah. That'd
well,
be
it was
great.
awesome talking to you, Father, and I appreciate you being gracious to take time. I mean, I could speak to you for like 3 or 4 hours
Yeah.
about any number of topics, but I think that our audience will get a lot out of this, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, it's great to see you, John, and you're great to talk to as well. So maybe we'll do it again sometime, and hope to see you in person
Awesome. Thank
soon.
you, Father.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Catholic Passage Podcast, and we hope that it blesses you. Please check out our show notes for a reflection takeaway, as well as more info on Catholic Passage. We aim to support parents and educators as they pass on the Catholic faith and the way of life to their children and students. To find out more about what we offer, or how you might collaborate with us, visit CatholicPassage.com. Most importantly, you can support us through your prayers. We'll be praying for you. Please pray for us.